tablet scope. This, in my case, it's the 1112C in action on the car. And in this particular setup, I've got it set up. You can see my clamp-on ammeter there. It's a Hantek product as well. It's the CC65, and I've actually got it in the high sensitivity setting there, which is 100 millivolts equals 1 amps. So strangely, even though it's a Hantek product, under probes, there is no facility to actually select a particular amp probe, including the CC65 or CC650 that Hantek make. Really strange. However, you can change the scaling to amps, and that's really nothing more than a label, right? So I've got the #1 channel here. That's all I require is a single channel. And what we're going to look at is the health of the fuel pump. So we can see the waveform that comes from the fuel pump. We're just measuring the current, of course, and that current is actually coming from the different segments on the commutator of the fuel pump. I can actually select the fuel pump on and off from this function here on the V-picker. You know, I'll just let you hear it initially. I think you can probably hear the fuel pump running. 100 millivolts equals 1 amp, okay? So just for the sake of conversion on screen here. So let's see what we can actually capture. You can see the parameters as the fuel pump is on. And there's the current being sensed by the clamp-on ammeter. So if I turn this off, you'll hear the fuel pump cut out. And then we have the waveform actually from the fuel pump itself. And it's being retained, of course, because the trigger is in normal. It'll retain it until we have a trigger again before it refreshes the screen. You know the story with that. This is actually just a captured image now. It's no longer an active trace. So what does this actually tell us? Again, the waveform itself actually speaks to the health of the commutator on the pump. It looks like an A segment pump to me. And so again, all the segments seem to be relatively even with respect to the current draw. And the nominal current draw is about 5 segments on the graticule, and which is 100 millivolts per segment. Each 100 millivolts, again, I mentioned to you that the setting on the current clamp was in the high sensitivity one, so 100 millivolts does represent 1 amp. So it's about 5 amps of nominal current draw on the fuel pump, so that's good. That seems reasonable to me. And again, you can see the repeating segments. Every 8 segments, it repeats itself. So you can tell that the time base here is 1 millisecond. So that's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's about 9 milliseconds of delta T between humps. If this was in the active mode, guys, which it no longer is, I could take the vertical cursors and actually get an accurate measurement of that. But that looks about right. Calculation for the fuel pump speed. It's kind of interesting to know the speed of the pump and whether it's within the realm of reasonable or not, right? Too slow of a pump will clearly cause issues with respect to the volume that it can potentially put out. So the fuel pump RPM can be calculated with the following formula. 60,000. Why 60,000? It's not arbitrary. There's 60 seconds in a minute, of course, and if we turn that into milliseconds, which is our unit of measure here, that would be 60,000. So 60,000 divided by our delta T on the scope, which we took to be about 9 milliseconds roughly, we can find out the RPM. So let's just plug in those numbers. So let's get 60,000 up. 60,000 divided by 9 milliseconds equals 6,666 RPM of the pump speed. So that seems reasonable as well, right? I think that's well within the range of typical. Pretty straightforward, nothing too fancy. I had actually my V-packer on, was the scan tool I was using to operate the fuel pump. But again, you don't need that. You can just cycle the key, and most cars will prime. And the worst case scenario, you just put it in a run mode. If you have to, actually get the car running, get the fuel pump in operation. It's just a bit more noise, and I'm inside my garage here, so clearly I don't want to run it inside the garage. This scope it's no time base friendly. I can tell you, you can't set it for a very slow time base, and then you could actually see the inrusher current on the pump like I can on some other scan tools I have, other scopes I have, pardon me. And but anyway, we can see the basic capture of the fuel pump, which is what our point of interest was here. So I hope that makes some sense, guys. But 5 amps draw, that's good. All the commutator segments are all the windings and all the segments are contributing. That's good. And the speed seems reasonable as well, just over 6.5 grand. Cheers.